Well, let's get started. I'm sure people will join us as we go.
We have
Um,
11 brave souls already.
well, thanks
Wonderful to
for
see you.
joining us, guys. You're paying attention. I wasn't seeing all of that. Well, as I was saying, I'm so thrilled to have Troy Ford, or Mr. Troy Ford, as many people know him, joining me today for the July Queer Love Project Book Club. It's special for me to be in conversation with Troy, and especially appropriate because when I joined Substack about a year ago, back in August, he was one of the first people I reached out to, and it feels like we're friends, as I said earlier to him by now. But this is actually the first time we've ever seen each other and spoken. And of course, it's virtual because you're in Spain and I'm in New York City. But thanks for joining me.
Thank you. What part of New York City are you in?
I am in West Harlem. So if people know Manhattan, I'm up by City College, about 20 blocks north of Columbia University. So
Oh,
yeah, during all the protests and everything, yes, that was in my front yard, basically. So,
oh wow. Okay. Cool.
uh, so I just want to do a short intro for people who might not already be aware, but Troy is the author and editor, and people are obviously most familiar with his two Substack newsletters, the Writing Focus Ford Knows Books and QStack, an LGBTQIA plus directory platform and community of newsletter writers and readers, which I'm a member of. And if you're not already and you want to find out about QStack, you should join. Troy is a native Californian. He grew up overseas in the Middle East, and he eventually settled in San Francisco Bay Area, where he earned a BA in rhetoric from UC Berkeley. And since 2019, he's lived in Sitges, Spain with his husband and Amstaff Terrier. And I guess what I want to start with is, how is Bubba? Because I know you recently shared some news about his health issues.
Bubba. Well, Bubba's going in for surgery tomorrow morning, actually.
Oh,
And we've gotten some sort of conflicting information, but it looks like he does have pancreatic cancer. So they're
mm,
going to go in and try and get the tumors out. It doesn't look like it's metastasized. So he'll be on chemotherapy for the rest of his life. The
wow.
prognosis is not very long. Unfortunately, they said on average about a year. So we're a little disappointed by that, and we're trying to give him as much love
Of
and
course.
comfort as we can. He doesn't know. I mean, he's completely oblivious, and he seems otherwise fine. So it's kind of like you know, case day by day, basically.
Yeah.
But thank you
Well, I'm
for
sorry to
asking.
hear that, but good luck with everything.
Yeah.
Also, I realized I skipped over one part of your bio, and I want to go back to it because you've been really busy this year. Not only did you release Lamb, which we're going to be talking about, but you also released Unsung, which is a short film collaboration with Kimberly Warner's Unfixed Media, and it recently won the Our Pride 2025 Innovative Storytelling Award. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was definitely a team effort, and we're very, very happy to have received the award. But most especially the reception we've received for the film itself. It's very personal. For stories of for queer people, and it's if anyone hasn't had a chance to watch it already, it's on YouTube. And there's links on QStack and yeah, QStack's probably the easiest place to find it. QStack.substack.com. Cool.
Sorry about that. I was trying to flip you to the top, but I ended up flipping my camera. Always learning new things, technology. Um, so I kind of wanted to start things off before we dive into Lamb about your time in Sitges and Catalonia, because I also read about your love of cookies. And I remember one of my favorite things. Hey, you've been doing these interviews and stuff, so that's all out there. Um, I remember how much I loved all the seasonal treats in Catalonia, especially the panellettes, which are a sort of almond cookie with pine nuts. Do you know about those?
Yeah, actually, we just had some of those the other day. We took them over to a friend's house for dinner for dessert, actually. Yeah, so those are really yummy. Yeah, they seem to have a baked good for every holiday. So
Well, and
but
one of my favorite is in spring around Easter time. There's in Christmas you have the caganettes, which are the little shitters, and then you have the cagatillo. And then you have
Yeah.
that candy that actually looks like a turd that I definitely bought and, took pictures of and sent pictures of people. I mean, kind of
Yeah.
leaving me crazy.
Yeah, they love their poop.
In my bathroom, I actually have a medieval reprint about I think it's Els Virtuts de Caganer or whatever. It's the virtues of shitting. So yeah, it's
Yeah,
a
I think
it's a
it's
cultural
it's
thing.
it's a it's like yeah, it's like a fertility thing, I think.
Exactly.
It's very
Pagan.
much of it's a pagan, sure, exactly. And also I think it's meant to kind of remind everybody that, no one everybody poops, so
Exactly. So to get things going, I'm curious about. I mean, you've been on Substack longer than I have, and you've kind of seen it evolve over the last few years. And then you started QStack how long ago? And like, tell us a little bit about the evolution of that.
QStack, I started just about a year. I think I started it in February of last year, but I kind of was like the official date was June 1st, beginning of
Hmm.
Pride Month last year. It took me a while to get the directory up and running, and I published a few things before that. But Pride Month last year was the first official kind of the launch of it. It was because I don't know how you found Substack, not how you found it, but like how you experienced it when you first signed up and started QLP. I had a hell of a time finding other queer Substacks at first. I realized after about a year doing Ford Note books that I wasn't seeing a lot of other queer Substacks and or people subscribing, and I wasn't finding other newsletters to subscribe to and start interacting with, because my ultimate goal was to publish a queer novel,
Yeah.
and I really wanted to sort of reach out to queer people and have them be part of my community and read my book. So I started doing just like keyword searches, all the different combinations of them, and it was really clunky.
Oh,
There are no demographic categories, so there's no queer, but there's also no women's, there's no BIPOC, there's no, older people, these categories, these kind of
yeah.
demographic categories that you might expect to find don't exist on Substack for whatever reason.
There's
So,
crypto, but no
uh,
queer. I know.
there's what?
There's crypto, but no queer.
Yeah, seriously. I'd rather cryptids than crypto personally, but
Good point.
but yeah, so I just decided I was familiar with the library, the Link Library, which is for fiction, all fiction on on Substack. Winston Malone started that, and I just thought it was such a great idea, so I decided to start collecting all of the queer Substacks that I could find and put them into a directory, and it just kind of grew from there. And
Yeah.
so I think at this point, the directory, I think it's important. It's an important resource for queer Substack, but also I think the thing that is, sort of that I hold closest to my heart is all of the different voices that I've been able to publish on QStack. It's a platform for the community,
Hmm.
not for me. I don't think I've only published on QStack one or two of the posts personally. I mean, I write intros, I write news and announcements and stuff like that. But for the most part, everything that goes out on as a QStack post is other people's writing. So I thought that was really important, and we've featured over 60 different queer writers and artists
Hmm.
and so forth. And I want to keep that going. So I think it's important, and we still don't have that category tag yet. So
Yeah.
and I don't know if we ever will. But in the meantime, it's an opportunity for me, at any rate, to do something community.
Absolutely.
That,
I mean, I
so
actually did join Substack a couple years ago, and I sort of lurked and I published with Sari Bodden at Oldster, and then with my friend Rachel Kramer Bussell at Open Secrets magazine. So
yes.
I kind of was like feeling it out, like my little like baby steps before I decided to start my own publication. But no, I mean, it's been really valuable to have that resource, and I found a lot of people, and I think people have found us at Queer Love Project. So it's been great. I'm glad you do it. But then you decided to serialize your novel on your own Substack, and that's kind of a crazy idea. But tell me how you got that idea and why you wanted to do it and how it all worked.
So, I had imagined originally on Ford Knows Books, my own personal Substack, that I wanted to publish fiction on it, but I didn't have really a lot of already, like short stories and things like that. Just a handful, really, that I have now posted them over the last 2.5 years. But I see, I had a first novel that I wrote, and I went the traditional route, and I queried out to agents, and unfortunately, I got some full manuscript requests, but they were ultimately no's. And so when that's still kind of on the side, waiting for its next step. I'm not sure exactly when or how that's going to happen, but in the meantime, I was connecting with a lot of other Substack writers who were in the fiction category, and were publishing short stories, but also serial novels. And I would say probably the first person that I connected with was Ben Wakeman,
Hmm.
and I call him the serial king. He has published 3 serial novels on Substack now, and they've all been wonderful. And I have enormous respect for him. And so, as I was wending on, as I was starting to build up a little bit of readership, I only came to Substack like 19 subscribers, basically. And once I kind of reached a certain threshold, I was like, okay, I would like to do the same thing. It was time for me to start writing another novel. I had been writing and then revising and then querying and then starting my newsletter. You know what I mean? So there was a lot of work going on, but not actual, novel writing. And so I had an idea to write this book that would be, I call it a novel in snapshots, because
Hmm.
it's sort of it's not so much linear as it is scenes and snippets and journal entries and short stories that the title character Lamb ostensibly has written. And um, I thought that would be a really good way to send out, episodes. I was mostly on it like every 2 weeks. A lot of people try and do it much quicker, but I was writing as I went, and it took me about 2 weeks to, write each episode as well as my other posts and revise it and so forth. But the beauty of doing it the way that I did it with this, what I call the snapshots, is that I didn't have to revise earlier chapters as I was going along. A lot of times when you kind of just write something straight through, you have major changes at the beginning. And this way I was able to avoid that, actually. And so I did this in part because I knew that I wanted to try and give self-publishing a shot. And my understanding, although you have to take everything with a grain of salt, was that if you self-publish something, even on like a newsletter or some other online medium, that you are then technically already self-published, and no agent is going to want to touch that work. I know that's not true all the time, and we've got a number of, including Kim Warner, Eleanor Anstruther, Mary Tabor, all have serialized either memoirs or novels, and have now been picked up by Alyssa Kennedy Jones's Empress Editions publishing house, which is a new imprint, and she has plucked them from Substack, already having published in serial or whatever. But
Hmm.
so that's the caveat. But I wanted to do this as a self-publishing project, and so I started it as the serial. It took about a year. I finished in November, and then I spent December, basically, of last year, adding additional material to the book. And so that was I call it's a novelette length. It's a little longer than a short story, and it's not quite a novella length, but it's I added the I added that. It's called The Fire Road, and that again is ostensibly
Mm.
written by the title character Lamb, who is a
Well, I
frustrated
mean,
writer.
right. I mean, you also have a history. You're from the Bay Area, and Armistead Maupin actually serialized Tales of the City in the newspaper. So it's not like this is an unheard of thing, and Dickens serialized. So it's a
But
cool experiment, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you definitely learn a lot, doing using this format. I think any different kind of experiment or whatever you do when you're writing, you're going to learn something. So yeah, I enjoyed it. Um, I it helped a lot because I've shared many times elsewhere that I had writer's block for a long time, like over 30 years. From the time that I had a horrible experience in high school with a creative writing class, and I was yeah, it didn't go well. Let's put it that way. And I became very self conscious about my writing as a result of that, and so for like 30 years, I wasn't able to finish a story. So even after having written that first novel, the unpublished novel, even as I was going into the second one and starting to publish a newsletter and contemplating, doing the serial or whatever, I was still very, um, I wasn't very confident, basically, and so it really helped a lot to get that feedback. I knew there were friendly people on Substack. We, formed a lot of friendships and connections with people, and so I really, really appreciated
Yeah, I
the very
love this
positive.
idea of the Substack novel. Like you actually said, you did a novel in a year, which is something that some people try to do. And we've had like the Kickstarter novel, we've had the Tumblr novel, so now it's the Substack novel.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So yeah, I encourage anybody to give it a try.
Would you do it again?
That's a good question, actually. I'm not sure I'm going to be doing another serial on Substack, if I'm being honest. Now that Lamb is out in the wild, I actually have two more books in the Lambverse planned. So I mean, we can get into that maybe a little
Yeah.
bit.
Well, I
I'm
mean, so let's talk about that. I assume your narrator doesn't have a name. He's just known as D, right?
right.
And so we get D basically investigating and excavating Lamb's journals, and so he's sharing snippets of the journals and short stories and poetry and their conversations and all of these types of things. Um, and what I liked about it as well is, you are digging into this SF punk scene of the '90s, which is a very DIY type of atmosphere. You have a DIY novel, and then you have, this sort of pastiche of different styles all coming together. I don't know. Tell me a little bit about the inspiration, because I know that this is set in the Bay Area. It has a lot of moments in an elite all boys prep school, and you went to a prep school in the Bay Area. So how much of this is right what you know and inspired by things from your background?
It a lot. I'll be honest, a lot. I've you know a lot of people know, again what I've shared, is that it was inspired by the death of my best friend from high school, from that boarding school that I went to, and I got a letter from the school in 2003 that he had died, so he would have been about 30. And I didn't know for almost 20 years what had really happened to him. And then through a little bit of digging online, I eventually discovered how he had died. And so I held that you know in me for 20 years, wondering what had happened to him, and wondering again, like what our friendship, what our relationship might have been, when we were in high school, if we could have been out.
Mhm.
It was, I graduated from high school in 1987. And so, I mean, that's not even 20 years after Stonewall, and it was still very, very, you know, it was definitely a taboo subject at my school, even though it was co ed. It was not accepted. And so, So I wondered about that a lot, and so a lot of the stuff at Walcott in the book, the school that I read, Walcott Academy, and I made it a boys' school actually. Um, a lot of those episodes and so forth actually did happen, not necessarily to me,
Hmm.
or even to my friend, for example. So, the figure of Lamb and the figure of Dee are kind of, you know, they're always a part of the writer. You know what I mean?
Right.
Every character is always a part of the writer. But in terms of, sort of, the the physical description and kind of, the events and so forth, a lot of it's been massaged and changed. But yeah, definitely my time at the school, there was a lot of bullying that happened to me, not to the extent that you'd see in the book, for example, but I saw that happening, some of those
Hmm.
things actually happening to other people as well. So it was pretty brutal at times. I don't know, but I think probably it still goes on in high school
Hmm.
still, but
Well,
I
you do
deal
have
with
this
that.
great line from Dee. I was going to mention, you say, I guess we all look at our friends through the lens of me. And I thought that's interesting because obviously that's what you're doing. Could we call this autofiction then?
I wouldn't call it autofiction. I mean, if I was actually going to write autofiction, I would not have changed, as much as I did, and
Right.
and invented, whole sections of it completely from thin air. So no, I don't call it autofiction. I think it's maybe a little bit more informed by real life than a lot of novels are, but ultimately, I think, it'll depend on the writer, it'll depend on the project, but we all draw
Yeah, of course.
on our lives for our material. So
But the character of D, and I'm going to start probing now, he does seem to have an erotic attraction to Lamb in some way, or there's this friendship, but then there's it kind of is quite elastic. And it reminded me of this idea that I've been really turned on to talking about ever since I interviewed Manuel Betancourt. And we talked about how queer friendships are elastic. And there's a moment where Dee says, we fooled around a couple times back at World Cup, but having to hide that we were gay from everyone just sort of sealed this bond between us. In some ways, it was more intimate than sex. I didn't need a fuck buddy. I had a hand for that too. And then he talks about how this is like the bond that they have, and I thought that was really special. And for me, from the lens of the Queer Love Project, I think the friend uh relationship is just as important version of queer love as the romantic one. So tell me about that, about this tension with Dee as the narrator, and this like kind of looking back and having sort of regrets and memories about Lamb, who's also, we should say, Willem Broder is his name in the book.
Willem Broder, yeah, yeah. So actually, I was thinking about that, and um, I want to say, so there are as many different ways to approach friendship and sex, and sex with friends and so forth, as there are people, but I think that there was maybe pre-AIDS. I think that maybe there was a certain amount more elasticity, and it might be that we've also regained some of that in more recent years with Truvada, with PrEP and so forth. People aren't as terrified of becoming infected with HIV as they were in that slice of time. And that's what I was really trying to capture, I think,
Yeah.
in this book, was that very specific time. It was, like I said, I matched their timeline with high school and college and so forth. I'm pretty closely to my own. And I know that, the first time I had sex, I already knew that, HIV was a thing, AIDS was a thing, and that I needed to wear condoms, and I think that there was a real fear all through the 80s and the 90s, and into the 2000s, basically, with am I going to first of all, am I going to have safe sex or not?
Hmm.
And a lot of people chose sometimes, or allowed unsafe sex to happen. I'm not sure, unprotected sex let's
Mhm.
call it. Um, and then lived with the fear of, what have I done? Have I just written my death warrant? And do I deserve this? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Is this something that I've done to myself because I hate myself or whatever? You know what I mean? So I tried to capture that a lot, and I think it changed the way that gay men related to each other for a long time.
Mhm.
And so in this sense, I think I was without the introduction of sex as a way to form a friendship or a relationship with someone. You know what I mean? When people were maybe being more cautious, I think that it became harder to form friendships. I think number one, and number two, I think that to keep the friendship that you did have, you didn't necessarily always want to inject sex into the equation. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So I was trying to capture, between Dee and Lamb, I was trying to capture that tension between, wanting sex, obviously, but fearing the consequences of it, not only, for your health, but also for, your relationship. And so yeah, ultimately the decision was, that Dee and Lamb would never be boyfriends, like me and my friend were never
Mhm.
boyfriends, but again, that there's that questioning, you know what I mean? Like what might
Yeah.
have happened, you know, if there was no AIDS, if there was no homophobia.
Well, but you do have this really provocative line in Lamb's short story, which is called Rubber and Glue in the book, that I found really particularly moving, where he said, the beautiful thing was that we paid for sex with sex rather than money, that sex is our currency, and the more we spend, the more we get in return. That's a really, really amazing line.
Thank you. Yeah, and that was, that was a short story that Lamb, that was in the world of the book, that was the only short story or piece of writing that Lamb ever had published
Right.
in a local zine in San Francisco, and it was from the perspective of him, and the guy in the story was completely invented, was not someone I ever actually knew, but he was an older gay man who remembered what life was like before AIDS and before Lamb was just at that point. I think the point of the story was that this was like your first time. So supposedly Lamb lost his virginity to this guy who was, maybe, I don't know how much, 15 years older or something like
Yeah.
that. And so it was contrasting, again, that older gay man who remembered what gay liberation and the sexual revolution in the 70s, was like before the cataclysm of
Yeah.
and, and then coming face to face with a younger gay man who had never experienced.
Well, I actually really appreciated how you investigated sex with these men and young men because we still don't have a ton of narratives that do it, and especially that do it in a way that is more, it's not even graphic, but it's more about telling the truth of the confusion and the strangeness. And you make a point of saying that Lamb is a bottom. And you have this line, which I'm going to read. They go home and have sloppy drunk sex, probably the other guy thinking Lamb was going to fuck his brains out. Lamb being a big old bottom and usually half blacked out, his tricks didn't get very far. When they got to the part where someone had to get behind the wheel, nobody wanted the job. There wasn't a lot of repeat business. And then later you also say that when they wanted him to be a top, and then the lamb fell out, which I thought was good because it's kind of like the purse fell out, which is a phrase we use.
Yeah, yeah,
So yeah, tell me
yeah.
about that. About like having this big 6'6" guy with a mohawk and piercings and tattoos, and he looks all this intimidating, and then he's this big softy who's a bottom.
Well, I think that, and I think that that's a really, it's a thing in, so some of that was actually, some of that was actually kind of informed by my own experience. And so, I will say, I mean, I've gone through many reinventions over the years with regard to my partners and my sex and all of that kind of stuff. But I think I kind of started out when I was younger. Um, Very timid, very, I lacked confidence. I did not, by any stretch of the imagination, have kind of like an alpha male kind of attitude, and I still don't. It's not. It's just not something I that computes for me. And so there, I actually experienced those kind of situations. You know what I mean? Where someone I would meet, out at a club, at a bar, or wherever, you know what I mean, would look at me and form an opinion
Yeah.
about, what kind of guy I was and what kind of sex that maybe we were going to have,
Hmm.
together, and then, experiencing this kind of like, disappointment, I suppose. Um, you know, uh,
The
that it
rejection.
was yeah, it's just, so I'm not quite sure how to, how to say it exactly, but um, so it's just, there are a lot of, we we look at men and we see that again. It's kind of like through the lens of me. You know what I mean? It's like you see what you want. You know what I mean? What you want them to be, and and then you actually meet and you start to get to know them, even if it's in just in the few minutes or couple hours or less, or whatever. But before you have sex, perhaps, and and then the experience of sex is sometimes, but often not what you were expecting. To actually, are clothes off and in bed. Things are proceeding. You know what I mean? So, I think that there's a lot of idealization in the gay community, and I would love to see maybe a more, sort of, I don't know what the opposite of that is,
Hmm.
humanization, I think. Not to say that, that's the entire gay community. There are many, many people who have negotiated and figured all of this stuff out for themselves perfectly satisfactorily. You know what I mean? But my experience has always been, I think, a lot more thorny,
Right.
basically. And so, a lot of my stories that I write are kind of about that issue, about someone who doesn't necessarily you know find their groove in
Right.
the community. So
Yeah, I mean, you also show that pretty distinctly at the Burning Man scene, where there's, for lack of a better term, the pass around bottom comes to Lamb and wants him to join their puppy play or whatever it is. Like they want to have a whole bunch of sex, and Burning Man is supposed to be this big, open, welcoming thing. And when one Lamb doesn't say yes to go hang out with them, he realizes he made a mistake. But also they realize, oh, he's not what we wanted, right? They wanted another top, and he wasn't going to be that. So I still have never been to Burning Man, probably never will these days because it seems like it's a terrible thing. But that was a fun moment.
yeah, that a lot of that was actually drawn from life, and so actually, and that was in 1990. I want to say 1994.
So before it was
Contrast that.
ruined,
What?
before Burning Man was ruined.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was like maybe about 6,000 people at Burning Man in 1994, and now there's I don't know how many tens of thousands of people. It was, I think, a much different experience at the time, but I will say I think they still are trying to hold to the letter of the festival. You know what I mean, and kind of maintain their values for better or for worse. So I just wouldn't. I don't think I would. I think I got that out of my system back then. I went twice in '94 and '95, and I was like, okay, I've done Burning Man. This is enough. But yeah, the experience of it, that was. I mean, that was actually kind of like that was a sort of a group. of young gay men who were my age, but who had that kind of, that almost sort of pre-AIDS kind of friend group that was still, very much sex was at the center of their relationships, even though they weren't romantic relationships per se. And there were a couple of them were, but
Yeah.
and the there were consequences, for people who continued to maintain those kinds of dynamics in their friendships and so forth. The um, the overdose that one of them experienced, the HIV infection that another one experienced. Those things actually happened. So, so there was. In retrospect, I mean, it was so long ago now. We're talking about that these things were going on. It's not like a pronouncement of what they were doing or why they were
Right.
having it. You know what I mean? Or that there was any kind of um, deserving of anything like that. It just was. It was what I observed in the gay community at that time.
I wanted to take a moment and let everyone who's joined us know that if you want to ask Troy any questions, you can leave uh, messages in the comments and let us know. I have more questions, but I just wanted to invite everybody to do that. If you want to ask the illustrious Mr. Troy Ford anything, no, I don't know if it's an ask me anything, but maybe they can ask you most things. Um,
You know,
um, well, one thing I wanted to touch on, this is tangential to Lamb. I'll get back to more of those questions, but you were one of the first people that took our QLP questionnaire, and I want to thank you for that, because when we started, we only had a couple hundred subscribers, and I was reaching out to people and asking them if they would do it, and you were nice enough to do it, because some people, once they read the questions, they freak out and they're like, "Oh, I can't reveal anything."
yeah.
But I was rereading it, and in the lens of having read the book, and I thought one of the answers was really special, and I wanted to share it, if that's okay, and ask you to kind of respond in some way to it. So, to the question, you said, I found dating incredibly difficult and anxiety inducing. Being an introvert and neurodivergent, small talk with complete strangers, eye contact, and making connections has always been very hard for me. Unfortunately, alcohol became a crutch that led me down a fairly dark path. I'm sober now, but even if I were dating again, it would still be tough. Much of the loudest, most prominent messaging of the gay community continues to center on sexual attraction as the leading ingredient in our relationships. Lust is as much a drug as alcohol or any other substance, drowning out some of the quieter and more mindful qualities that are also important. And I feel like that's a message that you've imbued in Lamb as well. So, I mean, you have these characters doing not only ecstasy, but doing crystal and doing other things. And I don't know, how did that, obviously that colored and influenced what you were writing. Tell me a little bit more about that idea.
Yeah. So, um, I'll say that, yeah, alcohol, alcohol in particular was something that I struggled with for many, many, many years. I'm sober now 3.5 years, and um, and I'm glad, I'm very glad that I got sober, and it was a I don't know, it's a difficult time on and off, for a long time, but um, I think that it is still, I mean, in San Francisco anyway, what I mean, there are a lot of 12-step programs, specifically for uh, queer people, and like the Castro has, like three a day every day here, and it's something that a lot of people continue to struggle with, and even here in Sitges, I'll say, Sitges is a party town. It's about half an hour down the coast from Barcelona. It's right on the beach, and people come to drink and have fun. And, you will inevitably see the sidewalks covered with vomit and, the drunk stumbling around at 2 o'clock in the morning and, you know, arguments in the street and that kind of thing.
Or 5 o'clock in the
So,
morning.
or 5 o'clock, sure. And, you know, and so it's still, I think it's still very much, we want very much to present an image to ourselves, to other people of having it all together, of,
Mhm.
of being, completely, of being young and of being hot, and of being, muscled and, gorgeous and fun and, having money and so forth and so on. But the reality is that that's just not what, a lot of people's experience. And, if some of those things were not my experience, as I was a younger person and I was dating and so forth. Alcohol helped me. I won't say it made me a more social person. You know what I mean? It just made me a less self-conscious person.
Mhm.
And so I'll say that even, even now, it's- I still struggle with that. I have a chronic anxiety disorder, and it doesn't really ever go away. And so you just have to kind of deal with it, manage it, and so forth.
Mhm.
But a lot of people, never really reach that point, unfortunately. And so I think a lot of my fiction deals with that, with the less glamorous parts of being gay, and I think that that's okay. I mean, I do struggle sometimes with the idea that there was a time when people just expected that, or I should say, um, the depictions of gay people in the media, in novels in the 50s and 60s, or even maybe even to the 70s, that would depict gay people as lonely, gay people as having drug and alcohol problems and so forth. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of pressure, I think, for people who are writing or artists or whatever about the gay experience to show the not so the more glamorous side of
Yeah.
things. And I think it's perfectly okay. If you're going to write what you know, then write what you know. And what I did was a little bit messy.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things I've talked with friends about. A lot of the young, queer YA literature. It's, almost just too rosy, everything is too perfect, everything is it's really sweet and sentimental, but I'm like, that's not the world that I knew, even in high
Yeah.
school. So I was like, "Oh, it's nice that everybody kind of gets along and everybody understands their, diversity and all of that." But it's I think, especially, I mean, we're both Gen X. I think that, you want to show what we experience as well and not be erased.
Yeah. And I think, you know, a and it still happens, you know what I mean? It's still
Yeah.
there, like I said, I see it every day here, and so I know it happens, it continues to happen out, in the world just because we've made a lot of strides, even if they are being eroded. We have made a lot of strides, but that doesn't mean everything is solved overnight. This is, generational trauma for a lot
Yeah.
of us, and and it's very much I think, I mean, I hate to use the word privilege, you know what I mean? But there are places in the world where being gay is still criminal. And so they are still experiencing much of what we had to experience, before gay civil rights. And I think, they need stories too, you know what I mean? That resonate with their experience right now. So
Mhm.
I don't think there's ever going to be time. I want to say on Substack, I read an article by someone with a very large following, and was kind of like, oh, these gay stories that that say how difficult and bad and so forth it is. They're not relevant anymore. And I was just like,
Hmm.
are you kidding? I think they're going to be relevant for generations to come. I think, if
Yeah.
if, if not necessarily in the United States, maybe, although maybe. Definitely in other parts of the world. So I just think everybody should be able to write what they want to write.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's partly that idea that people want to write a future and make it happen, but I also agree that we just need more stories of every type, not just the ones with lots of rainbows and unicorns. Um, so I know it's terrible to reduce somebody's book down to one thing, but I was thinking, and I'm not going to give away the ending, but I was thinking, above all else, do you think Lamb is about the need for gay men to shed shame and fear? Because shed shame and fear is a line that you have in the book, and I thought that is something that, especially our generation, with the trauma that we experience, is still trying to do. So, what do you think?
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is ultimately. I mean, um, bullying, the bullying aspect of it, not only at the boarding school, the fictional all boys school that they went to and that Lamb experienced, but also in the gay community. That kind of like, I expect you to be a certain way is sometimes comes out as a kind of bullying or whatever. I think that is the twin of the fear and shame that you're talking about. I think we need to talk about it more,
Yeah.
about those really, sort of deep shame itself, especially fear as well. They they're very insidious and they color a lot, and it's incredibly hard to talk about them because as you talk about them, you are experiencing all of those feelings of shame, fear all
Yes.
over again. You know what I mean? So it's almost in a way traumatizing to actually talk about them. And then, and one of the other kind of themes in general in Lamb was uh, something um, that it comes up in one of the stories Lamb writes, which is that we didn't have a vocabulary for our feelings, and that sex was, a way to express feelings non-verbally, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And so, and yet there are just some things that need to be said, and I think that finding our words for those feelings is really important. So that's probably will continue to be a major thing in my
Well, it's definitely
writing. So
something that I've learned from younger generations. Millennials and Gen Z have taught me that, and therapy's taught me that. So it's definitely something that I agree with. You mentioned that you have more ideas, or there's a Lamb universe. Tell us a little bit more about that.
So the Lamiverse is so I've decided I'm going to go ahead, and I went to the Unconference in Matera, Italy last month. Actually, it was great, and it was for indie independently published writers. And a lot of the advice I got was that, especially for literary fiction and standalone books in the self-publishing sphere, is makes it a very difficult prospect. So they encouraged me to, think of ways I could maybe make a series out of this, and I was immediately inspired. So the story of Lamb and Dee ends kind of somewhere around 2000, and so I was going to, for the next book, I'm going to be starting that in August. I'm going to be writing about Dee's life. Dee is the narrator of Lamb, but also I think he's a complex character that hasn't been really getting a lot of attention. You know what I mean? Because the book is titled Lamb, and he doesn't even get an actual full name.
Yeah.
And so, but I did that intentionally, and I wanted to allude to things and to leave a lot to the imagination of the reader about who this character was. Maybe almost too much, because I think, like I said, he hasn't been getting a lot of attention, but he is a complex character, and so this next book I'm planning to write will be an opportunity for people to see who Dee, sort of really is, and what happens to him and his life between, the end of his friendship with Lamb and Lamb's death, and then the events 20 years later that he narrates. So that'll be the next book, and then the book after that, I'm actually going to go back and tell the story of what happens to Lamb between his disappearance and his death.
Hmm.
And and that's a 3 year period, which I've got some great ideas about how that went. And I imagine it being not as, sort of bittersweet and sad. Bittersweet, yes, but not as kind of sad as Lamb was at times, but have it be like a little bit of a redemptive story about even though he dies, you know,
I love that. I mean, you're inspiring me just talking about it. I've been finishing the latest revision of my novel that I got have it out on Query as well. And you fall in love with these characters, and I have these side characters that in the very first draft I had full chapters about them, and that's all been cut. But I know their backstory, and I know all these other stories about these side characters. And in my dreams, I am like, oh, I want to continue writing about these people because I've spend so much time with them and I'm not done with them. But as you said, it's frustrating when you're trying to figure out the whole publishing landscape and you're like, okay, I just need to get this first book out, then I'll think about the next ones. But you're making it seem possible.
yeah, it's just, I think as you go, the next step appears in front of you. So, I wish you great luck, good luck in your querying process. Have you already started that?
Yeah, you probably started it too soon, so then I pulled back, and I'm going to start again this fall. I had some full manuscript requests, and yeah, I got the no's, and then have been just tinkering with some other things. But I love the book, so if it doesn't go the mainstream publishing route, I'm going to go the self-publishing, not self-publishing, maybe for small press or something. But yeah, it's once I went to AWP, I got very inspired. I mean, now I'm thinking like we need a QLP small press, and like we need to publish our own book. But I'm not ready for that. I have to get my own books out first before I start publishing other people's stuff. I
Yeah,
already published it.
I think everyone goes through that like, oh, I should be a small press.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a whole thing.
Exactly. Um, well, I don't know. I'm not able to see if anybody's left any queries or questions because I can't see it for some reason. But I did just want to let people know that if they haven't already secured their copy, that Lamb is available in paperback and ebook at bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble, and Amazon. Plus, and I'll let you explain this. If you buy the book, either the ebook or paperback, Troy says that he will comp you a 6-month subscription to his newsletter. And what do they get with Ford Notes books?
With Ford Notes, you get access. All of Ford Notes books is free for the most part, except I have one series, the Road Published series, which I do once a month, and that is actually I call it the choose your own adventure approach to writing and publishing books, and that's kind of it's less of a how to, and it's more of a this is what it's been like for me, and starting with my first novel and through my second novel, serializing and querying agents, everything. I can see this going on for years, but that's behind a paywall, so you will get access to those. The most recent one was talking about actually the Indie conference that I went to last month, and a lot of the things that we talked about. AI is a big deal right now. Everybody is talking about it. Everybody is worried about it, curious about it, concerned about it, and so that was a big part of it. But also we talked about a lot of things, but also marketing and direct sales. There's actually there's there is a path forward for self-publishing. It that can be quite lucrative. And so I was able to talk to some writers that are doing very, very well on this self-publishing actually. And then also just I looked at a lot of the softwares and apps that people are using. And so that was those things were pretty
Yeah.
well this last month.
Well,
And that's what you
Troy,
get.
is there anything else about Lamb that we haven't touched on that you want to make sure that your fans or potential readers want them to know?
Not that I can think off the top of my head, except that I will also comp you an additional 6 months to both actually QStack and to Ford Knows Books if you leave a review on Amazon or on Goodreads. It would be very, very helpful to me if you read that to go ahead and just write a few words. I loved it. I hated it, or anything in between. So
I love all the perks. All right. Well, Troy, you've obviously figured out how to build a platform and how to get your book out there. So I'm impressed, and thanks for doing it. And thanks for
thank
joining me.
you. Thank you so much. My pleasure.
All right. Talk to you later. Bye.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.